Hey, and welcome back to Thoughts from the 305. I'm your host, Annie La Negra, and this week we're going to talk about more about what first generations actually go through, more specifically, first gen millennials. I have the pleasure to introduce my fellow AA community organizer and just overall badass, Audrey, to come have this conversation with me today. Good day, madame. What is happening with you? How are we doing?
Ooh. I'm doing okay. I think in between the pandemic and kind of, the pressure of life, I'm okay under all the circumstances. And I feel like this kind of relates into the discussion that we're about to have. But, I'm just grateful to be here, grateful to share this space. Thank you so much for having me. And how are you doing?
Girl, same. It's Yeah. Global pandemic and just, about that grad school life and just working to make sure that, people don't lose their homes and stability. But it's just such a whole thing. But yeah, we're definitely going to get into more of that. And again, thank you for being here. And for our listeners, I did want to, before we begin, drop a definition of first generation so that we're all in the same context. So the Oxford Dictionary describes first gen, it's an adjective, denoting the first generation to become a citizen in a new country, or the first of a generation to be born in a country of parents who had immigrated. So I had mentioned this a little earlier in one of the first episodes that, I am the daughter of immigrants. So I do fall under that first generation category. How about yourself, Audrey?
Definitely. So I was born in California. I'm what a lot of folks may call an anchor baby, because I was born a U.S. citizen. My parents were not, and my parents, they definitely wanted a better life, not only for themselves but also for their children. My mom was like 6 months pregnant, came to California, had me, and then we ended up. I spent some of my early childhood in the Caribbean, in the Cayman Islands for a little bit, before coming back here to the States. My parents are Filipino, so when we think about first generation, right? The Philippines is interesting, right? Because
no, it is our Latinx brethren from the Pacific Islands.
Correct. And it's funny because I'm so glad you brought that up, because we're Asian and Hispanic, right? And so I do speak Spanish. Not every Filipino speaks Spanish, but I happen to speak Spanish. My mom speaks Spanish. My dad does not, right? But it's interesting because when we think about the Asian diaspora and the Hispanic diaspora, right? A lot of people kind of forget that Philippines is right there. That we were colonized by Spain for many, many years. I mean, look at my last name. My last name means blueberries in Spanish, right? My last name is Aranas, for those listening. We were colonized for many, many years, but not only were we colonized by Spain, sometimes people forget that we were colonized by Americans. And so there's this interesting, I don't know if interesting, there's this really, am I allowed to say naughty words?
You can cuss till you're blue in the face. Okay. This is not safe for work. And for those that are listening, this is your first episode. Yeah, if you're listening to this at work, headphones are, I would recommend wearing headphones. I encourage it, because this is also a safe space where we can just let it all out.
Yeah, our history is just, history in general is fucked up, right? When we think about, colonization and everything that's happened. So there's that history, right? And then there's the history of our parents. Like, history in general is so interesting and rich and horrible and all these things, but let's think back to our parents. So those of you that are first gen, American, your parents probably told you all kinds of stories. when I was young back in my country, I walked X amount of miles just to go to school. You're lucky, because you're like waking up at like 6 a.m. to get on the bus, and your parents are like yelling at you to wake up, and you're sitting there like, oh mom, like, oh my god, like, why are you like on me? And mom, your mom's like yelling at you in their native language, like, get up, like, you don't know what it's like, for breakfast I had only rice and ketchup, okay? And you get all these things. Look at you. Meanwhile, for breakfast I'm having Vienna sausages and crackers.
Right.
So it's like,
Yes.
is it that much better? I don't know, right? But so there's that history in, when we think about our parents' history, we have to also think about history in general and why they are the way they are, in order for us to understand ourselves.
Right.
Because I think as first gen, like especially millennials, I'm still figuring out who I am and why I am the way I am. Thank you, therapy. But it's also like
hashtag mental health matters. If I haven't said it before, I'm gonna say it again. Hashtag mental health matters.
I think about history and then my parents' history, and the reason why I say it's important for us to understand our parents so that we understand ourselves is so that way we can understand our own childhood trauma. The child within ourselves. Why are we the way we are? And I think about my parents because my parents were refugees during the Gulf War. They had to escape, and my mom's story is very interesting. My mom, as a woman, she couldn't leave without a man. Oof. Right? I don't know. It was something like that. It was complicated. Like, she just could not get out of Kuwait. And so my mom got married to my dad. They had and they just started dating. And my mom was like, I can't, I don't know why, but something, they're not letting me get out of this country. So my dad was like, let's just get married. And my mom was like, okay, cool. And they got married. They were able to escape Kuwait. It was traumatic. My parents had never told me what happened. And I think that's maybe common to many other children of immigrants. Sometimes they tell you all the bullshit, right? They tell you all like, not bullshit. They tell you like all like the things that they want you to know. But when it comes to the things that impacted them,
yes,
of why they may have hurt you,
right,
they don't tell you these things. So for the first time ever, I actually sat down with my dad and I was like, Dad, you've never told me what happened in Kuwait. And this was, I want to say, 3 years ago. I was already like 25 by the time, 23 by the time he finally told me what happened to him and my mom.
Right.
The journey and the trauma and the starvation and, having nothing, and having to go through the desert, to go through different countries and people not understanding you, people not knowing people not caring.
Right.
There were 40,000 Filipinos that escaped from Kuwait.
Wow.
And we don't talk about that in history. And so when they were finally rescued, finally brought back to the Philippines, they could not find any jobs. Nobody wanted to take them. They couldn't find a place to live. And so my parents decided, they saw an ad in the newspaper that the Cayman Islands is looking for workers, and my parents were like, okay, let's go to the Caribbean.
Let's go to the islands.
Yeah. And so and that's where I lived until I was the age of 8, and then I came here to the States. But I think about that, when I finally understood my parents' story of what they had to go through and why my mom married my dad, and why she stuck with him all these years, even though they have their own, no marriage is perfect, but certainly when you have a rushed marriage, things may not go the best way you can, right?
Right.
So I think about their story and why I am the way I am today. It all makes sense. Like the history of the Philippines, the history of my parents, the history, of their lives and the lives of, of our country, the lives, the story of our country. It made me realize why I am the way I am today. Because I think that for many first-gen Americans, there's a disconnect because you're not truly American, and they make sure you know that in school.
No, absolutely.
When you go to school, you know, they look at you, they look at your food, they look at the way you talk, and the way you do things. That, you know, kids make sure that they know that you're not American. Not really. But then when you meet other people from your country, so I don't know, how often you go back home. Sometimes when I go back home, I have an accent when I speak Tagalog. And so my cousins and everyone, they would make fun of me, right? It's like, oh, you're the American now, so they only speak to me in English for the most part.
right. It's so like,
so as first gens, it's kind of like our identity is kind of like, like Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, a tale of two personalities, two stories, these, two countries, right? So like, are we really American, or are we, because I personally don't really like identifying as American, but I also know that I can't really identify as being Filipino, right? Not 100%. So it's interesting that we have to like think about these things, and then with all that history, with all of this identity crisis, we put on ourselves this tremendous amount of pressure to try to fit in into one of those identities.
Yes.
And then try to, and your parents will always tell you, I gave up so much for you to come to this country, to do everything I can, blah, 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 blah. So then your parents, because of the history that they went through, the struggle that they went through, they think you need to go through that struggle.
Yes.
They think that you need to experience what they went through, because if I went through this, you should go through this too. Which is like, that made no sense.
It made no sense at all. It does not make sense.
But I feel like many first-gen Americans may feel that way. And so here we are, we're going through all these struggles, and there's all this pressure to try to fit into one of the categories because, capitalism and our society tells us we need to fit into one of these boxes.
Right.
And that's it. And so we try to like identify ourselves and like put pressure on ourselves to do all these things, and also perform so well to make our parents proud, because our parents are always saying they gave up so much to be here, blah, 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 blah. So you better do good in school. You better do good in this. You better do good in that. And so I find that, or at least for me, I meet a lot of first-gen Americans that are the biggest overachievers. Like the biggest. I mean, look at us, like, look at you. You have like how many masters? Like 3 masters at this point?
I'm working on a second one, but I did but I did want, and yes, hold on to that thought real quick, because I did want to circle back a little bit as far as being stuck in that in between, because you're not fully this, but you're not fully that. I had a bit of an opposite experience, in the sense that I look like a certain way. I'm a black woman, and folks automatically, it's the identity that the experience that I identify most with, because it's the one that's easily accessible and easily visible to people. But then when I start exposing more of that identity, they're just like, oh wait, so you're not black? That's like, well, bro, what does that even mean? Well, what are you saying? Well, what's going on? And and going back and understanding the history of what my parents went through, because one is Cuban and one is from the Dominican Republic. My mom would talk about the Civil War and bombs going off when she was a girl in the DR, and I'm like, wait, I never really dove deeper into it until I realized, oh, you mean the Civil War that was happening when the U.S. backed the Trujillo military Marines, and when he was assassinated, this man who was very big on racial cleansing, and then Juan Bosch, who was a socialist, took over, but the U.S. didn't want another socialist government in the Caribbean, because you also had Fidel going on, down the ways there, and so the Dominican Marines, backed by the U.S., overthrew Bosch, and Balaguer took over. So that all of that was happening, and it's a direct result of of the racism that occurred during the Trujillo like every administration after that is they're descendants of Trujillo. And so you think about all the stuff that's happening in the DR. I go back and people pause and look because, oh, are you Haitian? Because I can't possibly be this dark and be Dominican. And then you have the Cuban side where we live in Miami-Dade County where white Cubans prevail, and it's just like, oh, but people automatically forget that the island is predominantly black because during the revolution, the people that could afford to leave their things behind were able to. And my father got here because, you know, he came on the Mariel. So, and the misconception is these are the worst of the worst were put on a boat and they were brought here. And it's like, barat. So he had to live, you know, he was living in Miami-Dade as a black man in the 80s. What? So, you know, them coming from those two places, and, you know, my experience is just like all these, you know, all these different experiences, and the only way that I know how to describe it is being in the in-between. I'm somewhere in the in-between. I'm not, you know, and then folks, you know, automatically assume that because I speak Spanish, oh, that was the worst thing that somebody could tell me. It's like, oh, you're Spanish, right? Bruh. What? So should I be asking you if you're English? Like, what do you see how illogical that sounds? Like, what are you talking about? So that's just, you know, mind-boggling to really just see how people respond to having multiple identities and coming and not being rooted in the United States. I learned Black history from the US as much as everybody else, and, you know, in school you know, the Black history that I understand is from the Caribbean, from Latin America, and that experience. And so when people tell me that I'm not Black, I'm just like, bro, what do you mean? But what do you mean? And it's just, it's a whole continuous thing. And being first gen, you know, add on all of that to being first gen, it's just like, okay, so what you're saying is I'm gonna have to defend my identity and learn how to deal with all the bullshit that's happening by myself. Okay. And then go back and forth between the native language and, you know, but what is the language? I mean, I was a Spanish speaker, and then I went to, you know, pre-K, and I learned how to speak English in pre-K. So it's like,
I'm so glad you highlighted this topic of the in-between and racism and colorism, right? Because that's something that, you know, many face, especially being in the in-between, right? Because when you're coming from another country and you come here and people don't really understand, they don't really understand history, or they may not understand, you know, things. I can't tell you how many times, I mean, men have, you know, in the past, you know, came up to me, hey, like, what you mixed with? And you really had someone tell me that. Yes. And I was like, what? And back in the day, people were like, you know, like, you're so pretty and exotic, and, you know, are you like half this or half that? And I'm like, bro, do I have to be those things, right? So and also to your point about, you know, this. So there are many themes that you just brought up in like 2 minutes of how violence, you know, creates this like generational trauma, you know, for many of us first gens, right? Because of what our parents went through and what their parents may have gone through and what their parents may have gone through. There's this generational trauma that gets passed down to us, and we're still trying to fucking figure it out and process it. And then in the case for you, you know, you being a Black Latina, people can't, for some reason, for some reason, I always find it interesting that people don't understand that Black people exist outside of Africa and the United States. And so I always find that fascinating, you know, when, you know, for example, I remember this is not really related to first gen, but I think about, you know, Idris Elba, right? I remember it was like in high school. It was like, oh, he's so fine, blah, blah, blah. And then, someone brought up, did you know that he's British? And I remember this other girl, this basic girl was like, oh my God, they have black people in England?
Oh,
and
sweet Jesus. No.
And I was like,
no.
And I was like, and I remember thinking, I was like, what? I'm so confused. I'm like, what?
She lived her entire existence thinking that only white people resided in the UK.
Correct. And so, and I think that's a common thing right here in our own country.
Yeah.
So, my question for you is that sometimes when you travel within the US and you start speaking Spanish,
I don't.
Like funny.
I don't because it's so hard for people here with the amount of diversity and the different cultures we have in Miami-Dade County. I realize that it's so hard for people to understand that you can be any race and speak multiple languages because it's a native language. And so when I leave Miami-Dade County, I strictly speak English most of the time, unless I'm with a group of people that I know and I'm in a clique that I'm comfortable with. But I usually do not speak Spanish because I always joke around. It's like if I go to a place like Iowa or like North Dakota and I start speaking Spanish, they'll probably burn me at the stake because it's just not. People don't do that.
Burning their mind.
It's just like what? And it's like this episode of Psych, which is my favorite, but it's one of my favorites, where they go to a very small town, like a couple hundred people, and it's there are no black people in this town. This little girl goes up to Gus, who's black, and she's like, "Are you Frederick Douglass?" And it's like, oh. I know that they were exaggerating and like joking and whatnot, but I'm just like, yeah, there are still places. Still places in the U.S. and and I want to kind of dive deeper into that. So going into that, folks don't really. Because even if you spoke Spanish, I'm pretty sure people are just like, oh snap, and going into that comment that you made about being looked at as exotic, and yes, you are a wonderful exotic creature, madame, but it's like the way that it's fetishized, it's just like,
oh no, for sure,
it's insane. And what's mind-boggling is that folks that do look like colonists and are descendants of colonists don't get the same treatment. Like, you can come here and be Cuban, be a white Cuban, or if you're lighter skinned from Latin America, Brazilians are worshipped here, but only a certain type of Brazilian. The experience is completely different because families do come here looking for what the quote unquote American dream, whatever the hell that actually is. And I kind of want to go into the differences between folks that have been basically given the opportunity versus folk that have to. We come here looking like the marginalized communities and the historically oppressed. So how, and it's just like, our parents weren't born here, we're born here, and we're all of a sudden it's fed to us that this is the place of opportunity, this is the place of great things, and then you're learning, oh wait, but this is also the place where let's kick it back to the olden times where we had whole internment camps for Japanese Americans or anybody who looked Japanese. Say what now? And then it's like, oh, and then the civil rights movement, but then there's still we're still living in a world where black folk can still get shot, and you're sitting there and it's just like, wait, so y'all voluntarily moved here? Oh, okay, did we know that all of this was going on? Because okay, and us that we have to we were raised in the language, as both languages, we're learning these things. It's shocking because it's I don't know, like, your thoughts on that, because it's just the experiences are completely different for first gen millennials.
I have so many thoughts on this. So I guess let me just share the story of my husband and I. My husband is white Cuban, right? So his dad came here from Cuba at the age of 2. His mom is American. And when we started dating, we're obviously, we're together, we're married now, but, it was so interesting that what you just brought up, how a certain type of immigrant got everything, whereas others really had to work hard. And when we started dating, and we were in college. I was doing 20,000 things, right? Because overachiever, all those things, right?
Yeah.
My husband, boyfriend at the time, was like, I've never met someone that worked so hard. Your family works, like, even your family, like, you guys have like such drive and like determination, and like you're so like, like, why do you work so hard? And I was like, what do you mean? And I think about his experiences. I don't want to talk too much about his personal life, but he went through a lot. And when I think about the privileges that he had, if his family was Black or brown, if they were Filipino, he would have been in the foster care system. He would not have been, I don't think they would have been as financially stable as they are now, right? Whereas if that was my family, if some of the things that happened in my family and that was known, DCF, all those other organizations,
removal right away.
Right. And we see that in our work day to day. But because certain immigrants, not to discount what other immigrants may go through, but there is a reality here, at least in Miami-Dade County. White Cubans really are in power.
Yep.
And, and I even think about like his family and like elections bring out the worst in people. So that's how you know how people really are.
Yes, ma'am.
But so with his family, we really geez, when I saw like how I think you brought up so many points, and it's hard for me to kind of like condense them into smaller subjects. But you're absolutely right that there's different kinds of American dreams, right?
Yeah.
For us, it was just like, let's just try to survive. Let's just try to make it. Let's at least try to have our own home. Right. That was my parents' dream. Right. My parents' dream is just having their own home because they never had one. And whereas my husband's, like, their American dream, I'm not really sure. I feel like for them, it was just kind of like, they were able to get a house pretty early on. Yeah. My parents had to work like, how long were we here? My sister is, God, my sister's an adult now. It's crazy. Anyway, I'm like thinking about, geez, you're an adult. What? It took them like so long to be able to save up to buy a house. To, it was hard, right? Whereas like my husband's family, since his mom, had money, they were able to purchase a house pretty quickly.
Right.
And I think about that, and also it's interesting because my husband's family, his parents don't have a bachelor's, right?
Yeah.
But they were able to be well off. Whereas my father, went to school in the Philippines, got his bachelor's and I believe his master's as well. Came here, meant nothing. Meant absolutely nothing in this country. He had to work. He had to basically start off again as an entry-level position.
Wow.
And worked his way up.
Right. And you're definitely talking about that generational wealth that a lot of people in Dade County don't like to look at, because you're also, bring up let's talk about the Cubans that were brought here, or they came here earlier on during the Cuban
Revolution. You're freezing. Okay, now you're better. I can see you now.
So and then you bring up in a that theme of generational wealth and all of the implications that come with it, because we talk about the revolution, how like Cubans didn't have to jump through the same hoops as Haitians, which is, I believe, equally as large a population in Miami-Dade County. Yet if you go to Little Haiti, if you go to predominantly Haitian neighborhoods, they're not as affluent as Cuban neighborhoods. And you're just like,
Absolutely.
wait, why? And I love the fact that Creole is on all county property as well. It's English, Spanish, and Creole. So if you're saying that the population here is so freaking huge that you have to add on an entire language to your government pamphlets and everything that has to do with Miami-Dade County, then why the hell is the income disparities so different? But we're just not going to address it at all. Why is that?
Right.
And it's a little bit more of a rhetorical question, because we know why it is. There's a certain look that comes with being Haitian, and it's just remarkable. It really is remarkable that folks don't. It's frustrating. It's remarkable and frustrating at the same time, because it's just like, how is this still not something to be prioritized? This is a foundation that was set before our time, yet we're still adding on to that foundation like if nothing bad were were resulting from that foundation. And it's the way that if you don't look a certain way, because even then I think the second largest Latino population in Miami-Dade County are Nicaraguans. We have a crap load of Central Americans in this joint, yet if you don't, a lot of Central Americans that are descendants from Native Americans and indigenous people, still, if you don't look a certain way, you're not given the keys to the kingdom. And when people are like, oh yeah, Miami-Dade is its own, it's basically an extension of the Caribbean, it's like, yes and no, but like there are a lot of deep South practices that continue in Miami-Dade County. It's just putting in a different language.
I mean, so I think what people don't realize is that Miami-Dade was segregated from the get-go, right? That's how it all started. I mean, look where we are now. Look at who lives in Coral Gables, who lives in Liberty City, right? And that was on purpose. The founder of Coral Gables purposely did not. It's like public record. He did not want Black people in Coral Gables.
And not to mention the Bahamians that lived in the Gables before the white people. So it was like a gentrification in its infancy. Correct. Yeah.
Correct. And we have this push out to like put people in the Grove instead, and then now there's this push in the Grove, right? So there's all this like movement, right? Because the county was developed in a way to be segregated, right? And so I'm so glad we even brought up like first-gen Haitian Americans. So my first serious boyfriend, he's alive, but you know what I mean. Sorry.
Stop it.
I mean, sorry. Y'all, this is just me, because he was my ex. Anyway, my ex, he's Haitian American, and it was interesting because he's light skinned, right? And so when we were dating, Haitians are very proud to be Black, very proud to be Haitian, right? And I was telling classmates, I was like, yeah, my boyfriend's Haitian. They're like, oh, you're dating a Black guy? And I'm like, and I was like, okay, why are we whispering this? A Black guy, what does that mean? What does that mean? I didn't understand. And when they met him, it was so weird because this was like old friends from high school. This is the reason why I'm not friends with many people in high school anymore. But this old friend, met him, and they were like, "Oh, Audrey, you said he was Black. He's not really Black."
Oh, sweet, no.
And I remember my ex's face when he heard that. He was like, "What? do you not know what Haiti is? Like, do you not know where Haiti is? Do you not know? So it was like this whole thing, right? And so that was an interesting conversation, and I've always remembered that, and always appreciated this about him, that whenever, because you brought up colorism earlier, this issue that many Americans, and this person was Latina, right? That many here in Miami, a lot of Miamians, just in general, if you don't fit into, like what you were saying earlier, that mold of what people think Black American is,
yep.
or what you can't possibly be, Caribbean Black is different from this Black. That makes no sense to me. I'm just like, y'all, what? And this weird notion that it's like, oh, if you're if you speak Spanish, you're not really Black. Oh, but you're Black, you're not really Latina, because even though it just makes no sense, right? So it's like, why? And we know why that is. It's because of this intersection of white supremacy with capitalism, right? And in our society, this narrative is constantly pushed that this is what Latinx looks like.
Right.
This is what Black looks like. This is what X, Y, and Z, and that's it. There's no such thing as a spectrum or a nuance or whatever, and then that trickles down into our everyday, right? So in our everyday, that kind of like pushes many people in our community to say, you should stay in your lane,
right?
Because that's what you are. You should stay over there because that's what you are. Without actually having open conversations. That's why I so appreciate this podcast, is because people need to start talking about this. People need to start openly talking about what first generation Americans go through.
Right.
And genuinely, not this like bullshit, like, oh my God, diversity and inclusion conversations. Look at us. And it's like, look at us, we're so inclusive. We have like some Black people in our team.
Oh my God.
It's like, and it's like, or we have some like Latinx people on our team. Like, it's all good.
Oh my gosh. No.
It's like, look at us, like, oh my God, we speak Spanish. Ha ha ha. It's like, okay, but you may have people at the table, but are they actually included in conversations? Are you actually continuously investing in them, building up their power, and making sure that they realize their power in themselves and moving things forward? Like, are they part of the entire process? Are they part of every decision making? Like is that it? Like, is it like authentic?
Right.
Power sharing and all of that. And so, as first gen Americans, I think that many of us are finally talking about that.
Right. Yep.
Because I meet like older first gen Americans that are not millennials, and like, all my respect to them, because they had to play the game.
Yep.
And I get it, and I get why they have to play the game. And I, sometimes I play the game.
Yep. No, absolutely.
We all have to play the game, right?
Yep.
You gotta play the game in order to move forward. And I think that many of us are successful because we had to do that, but at what cost? And I think all of us have to kind of remember that when we think about diversity and inclusion, when we think about getting ahead, when we think about doing all these things, at what cost will it take?
Yep.
And so I'm so glad to have these kinds of conversations, because it's so rare to kind of have these, right?
Yep.
So I encourage other first gen Americans to also have these conversations within your own teams, within yes, have these conversations professionally, because guess what? They don't want you to talk about these things.
Nope.
By they I mean like the system, they, however we want to define it.
No,
but
absolutely.
It's the people don't want you to have these conversations because they don't want you to realize your power. And I think that's it. When I meet older first gen Americans and I talk to them about these kinds of things, they're like, hey, Do you want to be successful or do you not want to be successful? Because you should just, play the game as long as you can. And I have all the respect for them for that. But I think, I think we do need to have these conversations, because it's not okay that Black people keep dying, that Asians keep getting,
assault,
there's so many violent crimes right now against Asians. There's always been, but
there always been, and then that's the other. It's a history, dating back to as long as Asians have been coming to this country. This is not news.
Absolutely,
the violence against Black people is not news, and I'm glad that you bring that up.
So even when we think about Mark Wahlberg, I still haven't forgiven him.
Yes.
So he when he was part of a gang, he totally beat up and brutally almost murdered a Vietnamese citizen.
Didn't he blind him in one eye?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. But we love Mark Wahlberg,
right?
And I will never, ever, and I don't think he ever publicly, I don't know, maybe, I don't really also,
I think, because I did read up on it, but I think he apologized to the gentleman. I don't think he actually came out and said, I brutalized this man, I apologize to the Asian population, the Asian community. No, I think he actually just apologized, quietly apologized to this man, and it was done with.
Yeah, so that's my point. It's there's this narrative that Asians are, they're that we have as much privilege as white people because we played the game, we're quiet, blah, blah, blah. I hate that narrative because it's absolutely not true. The racism we experience it is different compared to other races, but it's still racism the same. Our struggle cannot be disaggregated from other people's struggles. And so, when I grow up, and I would tell my Black friends all the stories that I've been through, they're like, oh shit, some of those things are very similar to what I went through. Not the same, but similar, right? And so it's important to recognize that, because especially now and for every first-gen American, it's we've all been through this weird, depending on what race you are, we've all been through this weird struggle growing up, that again, kind of going back to our first conversation around being in between, but then also experiencing that violence. That, I think for me, I was sexualized a lot, I fetishized a lot. And so that was, and many other women from different races can say the same.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And so that's interesting, right? And it's you have to, so all this to say, I think for many first gens, there's so much to consider whether, when I think about life, right? I think about, professional, personal, sexual, and emotional. The four, to me, that's the four different things. I feel like as first-gen Americans, especially Filipino, Filipinx and Hispanic, right, and Asians, sorry. Speaking of, my mom was calling me. Sorry, I had to. We have to overperform in all arenas of our lives. We have to, because if we do not, we fail our parents, we fail at work, we fail at our relationships, we fail at, we fail ourselves, because we were taught this mentality that we have to do better than our parents. We have to do better than what society says that we're able to do.
Right.
So I think a lot of us first gen, we're just a bunch of fucking rebels, right? we're like, okay, we need to push the narrative that our country is telling us that we need to do. We need to push. We need to push out the narrative of what our country is telling us to do. X population, you're only good for making bodegas, right? Or, stuff like that, right? Or, that's what America is trying to tell us. Our country's telling us, oh, you gotta make all this money to send back home, because that's what you need to do when you're.
Yeah.
That's a whole conversation there, right? Because you live in the States now, you have all the privilege, so you need to send back at least half of your paycheck to your country, so that way you help out your family.
Jesus.
You have to fight that narrative that your parents are telling you. You need to either become a doctor or a lawyer, or that's it.
Well,
that's it. or if you do something, you got to become like a millionaire.
Yes,
right? Okay?
yes. You just have to make money.
Exactly. And then you have to fight your own narrative that, you have to fight like your own like mental health issues of like, oh my God, there's all this pressure that I have to perform in all these things. And then you have to fight your relationships, because guess what? Especially if you're in a in a racial relationship, you have to constantly have conversations with your partner. I never really had, it depends on who your relationship is with. You constantly have to have conversations with your partner, like, this is why I'm the way I am, this is why you're the way you are. You have to understand that because of our different upbringings, we need to, discuss these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
So there's this fight all around that, that we all have to partake in every single part of our life, and that is hard as fuck. It is so hard. It is so hard to rebel against all of those different things and then still try to stay sane.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that is a struggle I see with many first gens. With my own friends, with others, it's like, we're just trying to stay afloat and try to live our best lives. But then there's all this pressure, these external factors that we feel that we have to answer to, but we don't. We really don't. So with COVID and everything going on, I feel this sense of duty and obligation to help my family in my home country, right? But do I really have to do that? Right. Yes and no, right? Yes and no, that you do have to help to a certain degree, but does this mean that I have to constantly send a certain amount of my paycheck every single month?
Right.
I don't, what's the answer to that? And do I have to, make sure that I please my parents in every single way and make sure they're happy, blah, blah, blah. And that's what I tell it's so interesting. My husband doesn't have that experience with his parents, right? Because his parents are white Cuban, when his dad's white Cuban, his mom's American. I was just, he's like, why do you care so much about what they think and what? And I was just like,
Are we ready to have this conversation? We're gonna have this conversation. Let's go. That's all.
I'm just like, this was a whole therapy session. So do you want me to pay you the $75 now? Because it's a whole thing. Yeah. As to why do we have to please our parents? Because there is this sense of guilt and this sense of duty. Yeah. Because again, back to what we were talking about earlier, our parents were drilling into us how much they sacrificed and how much and yes, they totally did those things. But it's at the same time, you mentioned earlier, y'all chose to come to this country knowing it was all kinds of fucked up.
Yup.
But at the same time, when I think about our home, at least, the Philippines, I'm just like, yeah, I think I'm glad I'm here. But at the same time,
same.
At the same time, it's like, y'all really chose to be here. So then why are you putting it on me to fix your shit?
Oof. Yes. Yes. Yes.
I think we were DMing each other, and it was this post about, it is not our job to take care of our parents' trauma.
Oof. And that quote is still shook by it, because it's
right.
It's brand new to us. It's brand it's the realization that burden isn't supposed to be on us. And I don't want to make it, it's like, oh, our parents, what did they do? But it's they're coming from a whole history of trauma. They lived through these crazy ass times, and we just happen to be their children. And I don't know about you, I'm definitely an older sibling, so that adds on another layer of responsibility.
Absolutely. You have to take care of your So you're like a sibling parent. Like, do you have a big age gap between you and your siblings?
We have between the second one, not so much, but between the third one, yes. So not the third one, because there's 3 of us. So 4 years between my brother and I, and close to 9 years between my sister and I. So it's definitely there.
Right. And so, like, no, I definitely agree with you on that. Like, even first gen, oldest sibling. Oh my God, that's a whole therapy session that I've had with my therapist once, because it was like, not only did I have to fix my parents, playing therapist to my parents, I had to play mom for my sister,
be the role model.
Right. And so at a certain point, my mom, in 2012, my mom had her first stroke.
Oof.
And so my mom had my sister at 37, right?
Okay.
So she was a little older, but and so my sister, she's 8 years younger than me. And I was already in college, and my mom just, she could not, that first year was probably the worst, like a really hard year for all of us. And so not only did I have, so this is the funny story that I talked to my mom about this recently. I had to work, cut my hours, go to school full time, take care of my mom full time, and take care of my sister. And because I was the oldest sibling, I had to do that. I had to make sure that my mom was eating all the healthy food, that I was taking her to physical therapy, doing all those things, going to work. I was working at the time, I think it was Express, and then later on Jimmy John's, like going to work, and then going to school at the same time, and then being involved on campus, because, and then making sure my sister was all good, like picking her up, taking care of her, making her lunch, all those things. So there's this pressure that, I'm so glad you brought up like the sibling thing, because it's like, not only do we have to take care of our parents, but now we have to take care of our siblings, right? Even though we didn't have them, right? But here we are now having to play parent. Yeah. And my dad, and it still goes on today. So my sister is now 18, but she's, I feel for all the college students that are virtual. I'm so sorry. I know college is supposed to be the funnest time of your life.
Right, yes.
My sister is not, my sister, was kind of a homebody, but she's very, she was so excited for college to like do things, like clubs and all that. And now, now that she's older, she's like, now that I'm grown, I can go and like go out, right? And I'm like, girl, our parents are strict as hell, but okay, you can try that. But because my parents were so used to me playing that parental role, Audrey, you need to discipline your sister. You need to like call her and tell her. No, correct. I'm like, I'm just like, hold on, who's the parent? I'm like, what's happening? What's happening right now? And so she like missed her curfew or some shit, right? And my mom's calling me. You need to call your sister to tell her to come home right now, and you need to lecture her. And I'm just like, first of all, it was like 10 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock at night. I have my face mask on. I am laying down in bed. I am relaxing. Okay, this is not it. This is not it. Like this is it. It's beyond 9 o'clock. I don't even live with them, so It's just like this constant pressure, right, to do that. So it's just, all these are funny little things that first gen Americans have to go through, as like
the parent role, and then all of a sudden it's not only the parent role as an older sibling, but learning. I don't know about you, but I became a whole realtor, understanding that tax documents, reading bank statements, and all of the stuff. I'm just like, okay, because I know the language. I'm 10, but I don't know what any of this means. Like, what are you saying?
All of a sudden, you're the family lawyer. Yeah. You're the family lawyer at like 8 years old. I remember. Oh my god, I totally remember those things. It's like looking at all the documents, looking at everything, and like, oh, what does this mean? And I'm like, I don't even know what a notary is.
Yeah.
I don't, and you know, Google wasn't that popular back then, right?
Right? So encyclopedias were still in book form.
Exactly. So I was just like, I don't know how to do that. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then even when so for example, my dad's renovating his house now, right? And he was like, oh, could you do some research for me? And I'm like,
oh my gosh, yes.
And I'm just like, what? And then oh my god, and if you ever dare say no,
oh, you're the worst person on the planet. Like you don't care. Oh my gosh, and then it goes back to this, I've sacrificed so much for you.
Correct.
You're over here, I was like, listen, I owe the government basically a mortgage on the education that we agreed would propel me forward academically and financially. Still working a full-time job, back in grad school, and it's all these things, and it's like, but then I'll be a horrible person. If I add on more. If I don't add more to my plate, because there's clearly probably just one adult in this conversation.
right. And then I don't know about you if you're going through this now at least with my mom. The moment I started dating my husband, when we were dating, when you're having babies, you're getting older.
Oh, no. You don't even need to be with a partner. You really don't, because I get that. I get that on a regular basis. I've been getting that since I was like in my late 20s. It's like, oh, no boyfriend? Yeah, no boyfriend? And I'm just like, what? And it's funny because at that time, I didn't realize that I was also trying to do more work on myself, where it's like, because the men that I was attracting were super toxic, and I was really trying to understand that saying, it's like you attract the energy that you put out. And I was like, okay, so basically I was putting out a whole shitload of toxic energy, falling in love with myself, or even just initially falling in love with myself now. And I'm really, really, and then that overachiever, we are overachievers because it's expected almost, or like even with ourselves, the pressures that we put on ourselves. I'm really trying to, bang through, this is my final push in grad school. If I don't make it in this span, it's not going to happen. So I'm doing all of this, and I have to be truthful to myself that I don't have time to invest emotionally into someone else. Because when I think relationships, I'm thinking you're in it all the way. If you're in it just some of the way, then that's not a relationship. So I'm not in that point. I'm not in that space. Leave me the hell alone.
No, absolutely. It is. And so it's funny because our parents, I think about my parents, and I think about my parents' marriage, and the way, they kind of, my mom was 20. So my mom never forgets to remind me, I was 23 when I first got pregnant. So you should have gotten pregnant at that
point. Where were you 23? What 23-year-old should be having babies?
I was like fresh out of college. No, it was like a year after college, but like I was fresh out of college and all that. And I'm just like, what am I? No, I was like, girl, at this point I wasn't even living. I was like, at this point I was like, living with my boyfriend in his house, because my parents. Okay, so we talked about rebellion and like when you say no to them. Because I said no so much in my early 20s, my parents kicked me out.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So, and I feel like many other first gens went through the same thing. If they don't like fold into the what their parents want them to, they get pushed. And that's why I appreciate Joe Coy, the comedian.
Yeah.
He was talking about how like all his older siblings, because all his older sisters got kicked out at age 18, right? And that's like my story. I was like, shit, that was me.
Right.
I'm sure if I was a boy, it would be very different.
Oh my, that's a whole conversation by itself. Ooh, I was thinking about that. Yeah, he's talking about his sisters, and it's like, oh. Okay.
No, it's so interesting that the way, so my family, the way they treat me versus the way I've seen them treat men. So like, okay, even my own marriage, right? I'm pretty successful, right? I like to think. Mm-hmm. My husband is a teacher. Not to say he's not successful, but he does a lot, right? The littlest things. Oh, Chris is amazing. He's so great. Look at him. So I don't cook, right? I'm not very good at cooking. I've understood that. I'm okay with that. I try. I just can't do it. My husband makes a Filipino dish. Oh, he's so amazing. Blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, I'm out here busting my ass, catering the whole event, buying all the food. I basically bought the whole party, did all the decorations, did everything, did the whole party. My husband makes one dish. Oh, he's so amazing. I love him. Blah, 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 blah. He's the son I never had. And I'm just like, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, hold on. This was like my dad, I think it was my dad's retirement party. I planned the entire thing, catered it, did all the decorations, invited everyone, did everything. Husband does one thing. And but no, sorry. He did two things. He went to the dollar store real quick to go get extra plates and napkins. He comes back, everyone is clapping for him. Oh, thank you so much, Chris. He saved the day. I'm like, what? I'm the one that... Yeah, okay. But okay. It's like, the double standard between men and women in the first gen population. It's so mind-boggling to me that it's like, wow, how can we treat there's all this pressure on first gen American women. Not to say there isn't a lot of pressure on first gen American men, but there's definitely a double standard.
Oh, absolutely. And really, we're also coming from cultures that the patriarchy is still very alive and present. That's where you either adopt your parents' culture, in that sense, where the traditional culture, you come here, you're exposed to a little bit more progressive views, and then if you choose the more progressive views, then it's like, oh my gosh, what is happening? What the world is ending. What is happening? Like, I have a roommate, she's female, and oh my gosh, because I'm still not in a long-term relationship and I haven't had kids, automatically it's like, oh, but are you choosing, you're living with a woman? You don't have a boyfriend, you're living with... I'm like, bro, I'm sorry, we've lived with every relative known to mankind because we needed to save money because it's expensive as hell to live in Miami-Dade. What changed? Right. What changed between then and now? It's just gotten more and more expensive. Like, what? Exactly. I'm trying to save money, bro.
Exactly. It's so crazy to me that... And so, it's funny because one of my really good friends, she... we were college roommates. She's half Nicaraguan, half Puerto Rican.
Damn.
And because we had we had a really good relationship, and because of that, and we didn't have boyfriends, right? Mm-hmm. So her whole family thought she was a lesbian, and they were like, "When are we gonna meet Dre?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" Isn't she your girlfriend?
Oh, sweet Jesus.
It was a Thanksgiving dinner. And it was so awkward. Meanwhile, I was just back here in Miami. I'm like sneezing. I'm like, oh, someone's thinking about me. And then she calls me after Thanksgiving. She was like, girl, I think we need to calm down, like our photos together, like our selfies together. I'm like, what do you mean? And she was like, so my whole family thought our captions were like secret code for lesbianism. I was like, what? I was like, our captions was like, out here with my roomie, getting froyo with my roomie. Like, there was no code. It just said roomie. Like, there's nothing. Okay, Chipotle. Like, how I don't know if you remember, but Facebook had the thing where you could like check in at places.
Yeah.
Back in the day. A lot of young people probably don't even know what this is, but you used to be able to check in, and it's like at Chipotle with my roomie. And so people just thought that her whole family just thought that she was a lesbian because of that. It was just so interesting. Yeah. But yeah, all of these things bring up so many feelings, so many thoughts. This could be a whole series, like maybe I know this is a whole series, but like a whole 20 episodes, I feel like.
Oh, well, I'm definitely gonna talk about gender norms, and there's a lot of dialogue that you said earlier. There's still a lot of dialogue that needs to happen. I'm glad that we have more spaces now to have the conversation, and honestly, and you brought it back, speaking to older first gen Americans. I think back on even watching movies like The Godfather and how poor Italians had, the struggle that they were going through and the stigma, and, Nina laws where no Irish need apply. And I'm like, we have so much more in common with these people's grandparents than we do with our fellow millennials. I'm like, the only difference is they dropped the accent, and now they're 2-3 generations deep on what potentially would look like for us 2-3 generations deep. So it's all, there's still so much that needs to be done. And I look at people like Hassan Minhaj, and I'm just like, he when he was doing a stand-up, and even like, you mentioned Joe Coy, I'm just like, they're talking about the same experiences. They're coming from, when I'm looking at it, they're talking about the same experiences that I went through. It's just a different, not so much a different culture, but a different language, different location. But it's just like, we have more in common than we don't. And the more we start realizing that, the more I think, we can come to the same table and have more and more of these conversations, so that it's just like, looking at what strengths we have and our cultural critique, because we also have to come in, we go out into the world. That's not our home life. That's not what we've experienced. And so we come in as outsiders, in a sense. So we do have more of an objective, I think more of an objective narrative than our peers, because they live in it at home in the world and can be very biased towards it. So I think that's, some of the strengths as first generation Americans that we can bring. And yeah, living in that in-between is just still a continuous struggle, but there are so many mixtures in this town that hopefully one day we can finally utilize a lot that we have going on, because I do, and I'm going to say it over and over again, Miami-Dade County is at a place where we can completely set up a standard for the entire planet because of all of the different cultures and all of the different experiences we have living in one place. We definitely have the platform to do so, but if we don't, within the county, if we don't communicate, if we don't share these experiences, we're pretty much going to be SOL.
Right.
So, but yeah, on that note, that is it for this week. Thank you to our guest, Audrey. You are amazing. You're a rock star. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for having this conversation with me. It has been a trip down memory lane, both good and bad. But it is important to have these conversations, especially, just reiterating that violence towards Asian Americans is it's not that it's new. It's more visible, kind of like, look at BLM and everything that's going on with the continuous marches and the movement. It's more visible now. So just make sure that you keep our Asian brethren in mind in your thoughts. And if you, and it's so crazy, like I was wondering, and I was so out of the loop, because it's like, when you're friends with somebody, like somebody, a friend of mine was like, oh yeah, no, she was talking about her boyfriend, like he's been getting a lot of racist, and he's Asian, he's been getting a lot of racist rhetoric and a lot of people coming at him. I'm like, wait, why? I had completely forgot that he was Asian. I'm just like, holy shit. Right. And you forget that, you know, and I'm like so immersed in the BLM and, you know, Black Lives Matter and Afro Latino Lives Matter that you just forget. It's like, yo, we have other people that are going through that same struggle that are trying to organize more so as well. So let's come back to the same table. So yes, keep our Asian brethren in mind. And yes. As always, this is Thoughts from the 305. I'm your host, Annie La Negra, and I will be speaking to y'all next week.
Thank you. Sending all the love your way.
Yay.